Welcome to the YWCA Hartford Region Community Matters Conversations, where we bring you timely conversations that bring us together. Today, we have brought together an amazing panel of professionals from the mental health sector here to help us really figure out as a community, as caregivers, teachers, parents, providers, how we can best support our students returning to school during these untraditional and challenging times. More than ever, our youth have been faced with mental health issues and a crisis that has been doubled down and deeply impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. They are working through these traumas on a daily basis with half the resources that their adult counterparts have. And to this point in our life together in the coronavirus and the pandemic experience, we are yet to fully imagine or fully understand the depth of how critical this moment has been for them. Children have been without contact from their communities that they have started to build at school. Children have had to learn in new environments and new conditions and under new expectations. And now, as students prepare to return back to school, now more than ever, they need more than backpacks and school supplies. They need the support and the grounding of their community, and a community that recognizes that their mental health needs are at the forefront of how they will transition back to school. So the YWCA Hartford region stands on our mission to eliminate racism and empower women, promoting peace, justice, and dignity for all. And we recognize that parents in particular need some more tools in their tool belt to make this transition and adjustment with their children. And that's what we hope to do today through this conversation. So before we jump into our dynamic panel conversation, we wanted to share with you a video that in many ways shows us some of what children may have been experiencing during the pandemic through the eyes of a child of a first responder. Take a look at this video and see if you can take a moment to get a glimpse into the window of this experience that children have been having, realizing that every child is unique, every family dynamic is different, but we all have been impacted by what we have experienced through this pandemic. Take a look.
When I would go to the hotel room after a long day and it was just me there and it was very quiet, that was when I missed you all the most.
It got very worrying. I knew the virus was going to be like a big thing. And with you gone, it was way harder. I just missed you.
I remember he'd drop groceries off and put them on the front porch. And that's when we started talking through the window next to our front door. You would talk on your cell phone, and the kids and I would sit behind the window. And I remember one of the hardest nights, I think you were just exhausted. You just had your head on the window and were crying. But eventually you started sleeping in the basement. And I would not let the kids go past the top of the basement stairs.
We had to stay far away. But I just felt better that you could be like a part of us.
Mm-hmm.
It's still very hard, but it's nice to see you, Dad.
You have been so helpful to Mom. So thank you, okay?
Thanks.
I remember once you came into the basement, the best night I had yet. You know, your coworker had made all these different dishes for us. You sat at the bottom of the stairs in a rocking chair, and I was at the top.
I remember that, yes. I even remember the food. It smelled so good.
It was the first time we had been able to connect in so long. And as crazy as it sounds, it's the best date I've ever had with you in my life.
Without you, I wouldn't have been able to do what I've been able to do at work. You have to be absolutely everything to our 4 beautiful kids. I've never loved you more, and I know it hasn't been easy.
Should you guys try not to cry? It makes me sad when you cry.
Oh, sorry, honey. These are tears of happiness. Roberta, I admire you so much. Always admired you, but you've done things these past couple months that seem impossible.
What you're doing is a lot harder than what I'm doing. A lot harder.
Dad, I just want to say thank you for helping get rid of this virus.
That's a team effort, and that team includes you. But what carries me through is this family.
That was certainly an emotional telling of just one story, but we each have a story. And our children have stories of how they have experienced this pandemic. And they also hold anxieties, fears, and other concerns about how they will transition back to school. So, to provide us with some tools and some support into what we can do to better equip our children to succeed while facing these mental health challenges, we have our dynamic panel. With us today, we have Carolina Parrott. Carolina is a bilingual and bicultural licensed clinical social worker with a specialty in child and family therapy, psychotherapy, and has over 10 years of experience in the mental health field. She is a clinical instructor of social work and senior clinical supervisor at the Yale Child Study Center, outpatient clinic for children and adolescents. She engages families in direct therapeutic interventions, including but not limited to psychodynamic, trauma-informed, and evidence-based treatment approaches. She is passionate about empowering and serving children, teens, young adults, and families. Additionally, she is committed to recognizing and eradicating barriers impacting access to mental health care, particularly for families of color. Carolina, thank you for joining us. We have with us also Janelle Parker. Janelle Parker is a licensed clinical social worker for the West Hartford School-Based Counseling Program and West Hartford Outpatient Clinic. She works with a wide range of clients, including children, adolescents, families, adults, and groups who are experiencing a variety of issues such as anxiety, depression, family conflict, and poor self-esteem. Janelle is passionate about working with youth and families who display behavioral challenges. Using strength-based approaches, she helps clients overcome barriers they have encountered. Janelle also incorporates expressive art techniques when working with her clients. Thank you, Janelle, for joining us today. We have Sharon Small. Sharon is a social worker for CREC, the Capital Region Education Council Museum Academy, where he embraces the role of advocate, role model, and collaborator for improved educational outcomes for our community's children. Sharon serves as the director of the outreach ministry at the Northside Church of Christ in Hartford, Connecticut. He also sits on the board of directors for the Interval House. He is a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, Beta Sigma Lambda chapter, seated in Hartford, Connecticut, where he serves as chair of the Social Action. Thank you, Sharon, for joining us. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Melissa Mendez. Melissa Mendez is a licensed clinical social worker and a director or the director of early childhood programs at Wheeler Clinic in Connecticut. She is a past president of the CTAIMH Board of Directors and part-time instructor in the MSW program at Southern Connecticut State University. Her area of focus is early childhood, the impact of trauma and toxic stress on child development and behavior, and working with families experiencing intergenerational poverty. Melissa, thank you for joining us today. Well, it seems to have lost Melissa. There we go. Alrighty. So now that we got the gang together, let's have this conversation. So I don't know about you, but the first time I saw that video, I was very much so emotional, and it made me think of my own children and how what I may have been trying to pad and comfort, despite my padding and comforting, they still experienced during this pandemic. But I want to open up your reflections and ask the question, Why has the pandemic been exceptionally difficult for youth? And Melissa, if you can start us off in this conversation, why has this pandemic been especially difficult for you?
Thank you, and thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here. Um, we've all thought a lot about this the past 18 months in terms of what are the different layers of things that are impacting our kids and their lives during the pandemic. And I mean, there's multiple things, that we could go into in detail. But when I think about this pandemic, there's sort of two things that I think about that are primarily different and unique about this time period than any other ongoing time that children, are living and playing and loving and existing in the world, at least in my lifetime. And the differences for me, I think, in the things that are making this very challenging is, first of all, the layer of uncertainty around the pandemic, the longevity of it, the intensity of it, the level of uncertainty that grown-ups have in the pandemic. And I don't just mean us, regular folk who don't do high level, medical and biological research. I mean, even at the very top level, information is changing daily. Recommendations change daily. So all of us are living in this uncertainty that filters down to children at a very high level. So that's one major layer, is the uncertainty. The second layer, I think, is the loss, the overwhelming loss. And I don't just mean loss of life, although that is probably the top tier of loss. So many children and families losing, their loved ones. And, as we went through last year, really struggling to be able to say goodbye in a way that's that feels good and culturally norm. Yeah. So there's sort of these two pieces, and the loss is also related to their loss of friendships, right? Like the interactions, the interpersonal stuff that goes on. Seeing grandma. I've seen so many videos of grandmas seeing their grandkids for the first time once the vaccines kind of rolled out. Yeah. And I felt like all I did was cry for like 2 weeks, watching these reunion videos. So I think that the overwhelming loss and the uncertainty make this incredibly unique. And they are the two things that, as mental health professionals, we are going to have to probably be dealing with for the rest of our working lives. Mm-hmm. Those of us who are in the field right now who work with children.
Yeah, you spoke a lot about loss and anxiety and the unusualness of this situation that we are all under. Mm-hmm. With that in mind, the families that are tuning into this conversation today are raising children of various ages and abilities and diverse racial and economic backgrounds. So how do these differences amongst children factor into how each child copes with trauma? And Janelle, I turn to you to answer this question, to start us off in this conversation.
When we think of trauma, or a stressor, everyone experiences it differently. And helping children cope with trauma, I think one major protective factor that I think is just vital is having a strong support system, having someone to connect with, to check in. So no matter what age you are, no matter where you live at, no matter what walk of life you come from, having your support team tighten themselves around you, I think is very important. I think some barriers that I can identify is understanding that the child is experiencing a trauma. That's one barrier. Finding resources to help the child that's experienced trauma. For some different cultures, they have historical trauma. So reaching out to different community providers, they feel unsafe. So it's a challenge for them to get the help that they need. But I think no matter what age, no matter what background, you need a strong support system.
Mm-hmm. Team, any other reflections on that question? When we think about the diversity amongst children and how these changes and these differences amongst children play a factor into how each child copes with trauma?
I would just add that it's important, right, to note that just like Janelle was saying, that it's a shared experience, what we all have lived through, but it's experienced differently, right, for everyone. And so trauma, and I often describe trauma as a subjective experience for a child, right, and for individuals. And so each child, teenager, has their own process of how they deal with that and how it presents as well. And so what I would add is that for especially families that I work with, so like undocumented families, there's that presentation of a language barrier. So even though they want resources or are seeking resources, they don't know how to, or how to speak up for themselves at times, and what resources they can seek out to support them in reaching out for support. So I think that when we think about the level and the layers of impact and stress on these children that are coming back to school, many children, teenagers of undocumented families are the ones that are speaking for their families, right? They're the ones doing the translating.
Carolina, we lost you. Unless the issue is with me. Are you all able to still hear each other? Yes? All right, we seem to be experiencing some technical difficulties with Carolina, but we value what you brought to the table thus far, that even when we think about the experiences of undocumented individuals who are already navigating with difficulty this community experience, that adding this layer of trauma, a subjective experience, can be really challenging, and unpacking the layers of how deep these issues can be. And with that in mind, an article published in the Huffington Post stated that 1 in 4 youth around the globe are grappling with clinically elevated symptoms of depression. And in that, 1 in 5 have increased signs of anxiety. So Sharon, what signs and symptoms should parents and guardians be on the lookout for as indicators that their child is in distress?
Thank you. And that's a great question. And for children and youth, the list could be actually really long. And so if you're seeing a change in your child's, sleeping patterns, if they're suddenly wanting to sleep all the time, and, we all go through those phases, but if we're talking like prolonged periods of time with just this increased level of loss of energy, wanting to sleep a lot, maybe decrease or change in their appetite. So either they're eating a lot less, eating a lot more, extreme irritability, this sudden mood change, a prolonged period of mood changes, inability to recover from things that have happened, and a response maybe that's not proportionate to an event that happened. If you are seeing a child who's suddenly impulsive, both in school and at home, these are just a few signs, but the list could go on and on. I think the struggle for a lot of parents is two things. For one, when we're talking about children, your elementary and even some of your middle schools versus your junior high into high school, how do I know is this typical teenage behavior and hormones, or is there something actually really wrong with my child that needs a little bit more attention? And for that, you have to kind of keep open communication with your child. If you're able to establish that rapport and get them to kind of open up about what they're feeling, and, how they're perceiving what they've experienced, and really looking close at those changes in their behavior, even though they might be subtle, they might indicate something really wrong is happening. So you want to kind of key into that. In the school setting, if you're seeing a sudden loss in academic performance, grades, you had a really high performing child, all of a sudden the grades start slipping. If you're noticing, you're getting comments from the teachers that the child is sleeping all day, or the child is not engaging with their peers like they used to, loss of maybe high sports performance, loss of interest in wanting to do things that usually does interest them or bring them pleasure. That's a big one. And in all settings, if there's any type of withdrawal from your family or any type of self-isolation where you all of a sudden don't want to be connected with anyone, you feel like there's no point in trying to speak with anyone, you you just feel like you're in a sunken place, and you want to be by yourself all the time, that might also be a red flag. So these are some things to consider when you're looking for signs of anxiety or depression.
Thank you for that. A couple of key things that you said is, one, the changes might not be as different as the changes are in adults.
Mm-hmm.
That's an indicator. You know, sleep, I gotta admit, when things are hard, sleep is a go-to. If I can't get a vacation, at least I can get more sleep. And that's something that's a mechanism within most of us, that if things are hard, find the closest escape, which can be sleep. And two, you talked about looking at the things that are subtle, and no one wants to be that hyper vigilant parent, but it feels like these times call for a little bit more sensitivity, and it's hard sometimes to accomplish that while balancing at home learning and so many other things. So Carolina, I want to give you a chance to chime back in, because you're sharing a very important thought with us regarding undocumented families. How are undocumented families who are already hyper vigilant about their status able to also tune into their children? What are some of the things that are involved in that?
Yeah, thank you, Melinda. And I apologize for that as well, for the audio difficulties. This is such an important conversation, and I'm glad that you're highlighting that as well, because it is. I think that their ways are, it's unique, right? In the ways that they might support their children, and even for BIPOC families, right? That's going to be unique. It's going to be different. And I think more importantly, being able to acknowledge that is firsthand, right? As families, how are we acknowledging that? That my child's experience is going to be different than their counterparts who may not be identifying as Black or brown, right? So I think for a lot of our families, that might be that, you know, there's a lot of differences in how you present in the world and how the world sees you. And I wonder what you think about that. And so I think making space for those conversations are vital for our families of color as well as our families that are undocumented, right? That one of the things we talk about a lot is, how do we have a plan in place? If for families, unfortunately, these are conversations that we have that, you know, at any point in time, we may be separated. And what is my plan for my family? And who are my go-to people? And so there are a wealth of resources for undocumented families that they can seek out online, and I'll be happy to provide that as well. And there's an actually document that they can use to prepare their family, and a plan is a template that they can make with their children of what to expect, because we just talked about all this unpredictability, right? That children are facing and families are facing. And so the best thing that we can do is give them a sense of control and a sense of predictability in the situation where we have an opportunity to.
And Melinda, I just wanted to kind of respond to what Sharon had mentioned before about, you know, changes and not really, just wanted to add a comment about the role of social media, especially for older school age and certainly for teenagers, the role that social media has played before the pandemic in adolescent mental health, but really ramped up during the pandemic. You know, as a mother of two teenagers, I have a 16-year-old and 17-year-old at home. For a long time, that was the only connection to their friends they had. And these were very highly active social kids in sports and everything else. And the role that social media has played in these kids' lives over the past 18 months is bigger than anything that any of the rest of us have really done. Yeah. And that comes with some good things, but it also comes with a lot of negative things that we have to be aware of and thinking about as a parent. And as a parent, I know frequently, especially last spring when schools were first closed and kids were pulled, I was constantly asking my kids, how you doing? Like, you feeling okay? You miss your friends? You want to talk? And, you know, my daughter was a little bit more, you know, forthcoming. My son was like, Mom, I'm not depressed. Please stop. You know, but I kept going back, you know, and I said, okay, if you're telling me that you're not, that's okay. I'm still going to ask you. And if you want to be annoyed with me, that's perfectly fine, you know, but I think as grownups, we have to keep going back there, and we have to keep, you know, we just have to keep going at it, because you never know when the day's going to come where they're going to say, actually, yeah, I'm feeling horrible about this, or this really happened today. And, you know, my daughter had a cute way of triggering me to know that something was up that was bothering her. She would come into the room, whether it was in my bed and plop on my bed, or come in the kitchen, and she would go, okay, story time. And then she would tell me her story, whatever it was, this friend, that friend, whatever happened on social media. So They will come to you if you open the door and you say, this door is open, and it stays open.
That's awesome, because okay today isn't okay tomorrow.
Correct.
You know? And just like adults, we shift in and out. I don't know about you. I might need to get diagnosed, but hourly, I shift in and out between okay and not okay. Let alone a child. And I can't even recall now, the dialogue is so rich, but someone spoke to the point that children need a plan that they can own that makes them feel in control of something. Mm-hmm. And I reflect back to not in a trauma situation at all, but in raising children. My youngest is 2, or will be 2 in November, and my eldest is 4. And he wanted to watch this one show over and over and over again, and I couldn't figure out why. Like, it's not even that exciting. And it was explained to me by one of the workers at his daycare that was his way of exerting control. He knew the script of the show. He knew what they were going to say. And that was a space where he was in charge. And so likewise, children don't have that. That's owned by us as adults. And being able to relinquish some of that power in a guided way definitely is I hear as a powerful tool that'll help them arise out of some of the anxieties that they're experiencing.
Yeah. And Melinda, if I could just add one more thing.
Definitely.
We also empathize with, caregivers who may have not been able to connect like normal during the pandemic. Those of us who were direct care workers or were called to be in places of employment, and our children were forced to stay home or to be somewhere that we normally wouldn't have put them because we still had to go to work. Our jobs didn't shut down. So there were a lot of lost opportunities, like we were talking about a little bit earlier, with even those in your own household. Your mom and your dad and others lost opportunity to connect on a daily basis, to have those check-ins, those quick seconds. Now, even if it's a quick second of a teenager saying, "Oh no, I don't feel like talking, leave me alone," that was their normal way. And you looking at them saying, "Okay, he is okay, she is okay." By their snarky response, you still knew that they were okay. But even those moments were lost. So even your child who would normally respond that way, they feel disconnected. So you may see signs of depression because there's a different level of disconnection now, just beyond being a teenager who wants some independence. Now there's actual isolation that wasn't caused by them. So that also might change things in the household.
Thank you for that addition. As we're talking about trauma, Melissa, I know that the Wheeler Clinic runs a school that operates a trauma-informed practice. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so we have trauma-informed approaches in the classroom. We use a training program called Risking Connections for staff. My more direct experience is with our therapeutic preschool program, which is a trauma-informed preschool classroom for children who've had some pretty big, scary things happen in their life, little ones. But really, the trauma-informed approach, there's a lot of literature and a lot of resources related to trauma-informed classroom-based work. For me, when I want to explain trauma to someone who's not knee deep in trauma work, I usually say, in classroom settings and even at home with kids who've experienced trauma, there's sort of 3 pieces that we think about with trauma-informed work. And it builds on what you were just saying about having power and control and predictability for your 4-year-old with the television show that he wanted to watch over and over again. Mm-hmm. And one of the first pieces of that is to always empower, never disempower kids in a trauma-informed environment. And so what I mean by that is when children present with things like, I don't have to do what you say, right? Which we've all heard. An empowering response to that would be, you can choose not to do what I say. That's true. That's a true statement. But we still have to get through this day together. We still have to get through this task together. We still have to get through this life together, And so let's see if we can figure out a way together to make that more comfortable and more feel better for you and for me, because this is it. This is the reciprocity we need to create here. So it's almost like you're giving the child the opportunity to say, help me help figure this out then. Right? Rather than to say, yes, you do have to do what I tell you to do because I'm the boss and you're not, And
that's the easier go-to, isn't it?
And that's the easier go-to. And guess what? That's how most of us were probably raised, So, and we tend to respond to children when we're really heightened from our brainstem And we tend to go to what we are most familiar with and comfortable with, not the thing that's a little bit trickier and harder to do. The second piece is really offering children in a classroom setting and at home also unconditional positive regard. And that might be one of the hardest things that we have to do as grown-ups, is to offer sustained kindness and compassion in the face of very challenging behavior. Mm-hmm. And, you know, at the school and in lots of settings we all work in, we've got some children who have some really challenging behaviors. They're aggressive, they're offensive, they're hurtful, and lots of parents have dealt with that at home as well. But that unconditional positive regard is really important, that sustained kindness. And so an example that might be when a child says, "I hate you," you know, to their teacher, to their parent. You know, a response to that would be, you know, "I'm sorry that you're feeling that way. My job is to be here and to stay here and to keep loving you and trying to help you. And so is, and your teachers as well. This is what we're here for." And that unconditional positive regard is really hard for a lot of folks, parents who've had their own history of trauma.
Yeah.
And then the third piece that I really think about in a trauma-informed, from a trauma-informed framework for me, is a little bit of circle of security language, if anybody's familiar with that model. And it's this idea of allowing process and making space for the process of rupture and repair. So there will be rupture with kids, whether it's with parents or in classrooms or with friendships, and how the grown-ups in those children's lives allow for repair and how they facilitate repair. With little kids, I often tell little ones like 5 and under, I often tell parents, the worst thing you can do is withhold "I'm sorry" hug, right? If he did something horrible and then he's coming back to you a little bit later and wants to make up, don't hold a grudge against a 4-year-old, you know, because that repair needs to happen in pretty quick time, the younger the child is. The older the child is, you might need to give that child a little bit of space before you go back and say, "I'm sorry I blew up at you and I said that hurtful thing. It hurt me when you said that. And when I responded, I wasn't thinking about being a grown-up. I was thinking about how bad I was hurting. And that's on me. And I was wrong." And that kind of sort of ownership of when the grown-up messes up is an incredible teaching moment for the child. So those are the three pieces of trauma-informed framework that I really kind of think of as like the key pieces. Now there's lots of other pieces to trauma-informed work, but those are sort of the foundations of it for me.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And probably while you were talking, you saw me wincing just a little bit because I'm owning my own convictions in that space. Because my 4-year-old, like other 4-year-olds, isn't always the kindest. And mommy holds a grudge sometimes. So I'll own that and change it. But some of what you're sharing is really painting this picture for us that when we talk about a child's community, that community really got reduced to the household. And the interactions within that household became weighed on a much higher scale than usual. And now piecing back in the school environment can be challenging. I want to pull Janelle back into the conversation and ask a question. Janelle, knowing your experience, particularly with urban youth and urban youth who have experienced hardships, what do you think is the key role of parents in blending the relationship that children are rebuilding with the school and the household? How are we blending these two environments when one has been really fractured for so long?
Mm-hmm. I think it's supporting the children and reestablishing connections. I think the parents as well, going to the school and reconnecting. I feel like it's so important if a student can connect with one person in the school, one teacher, or even the principal or the social worker. I think that will help them as they transition back to school. I think it's so important. I think as parents, if you know that your children really struggle through this pandemic or have some concerns about returning to school, is making that connection early. Not waiting, even if you think it's something smaller, reaching out to their teacher, reaching out to their principal and saying, "Hey, Johnny or Billy, they're really struggling this year. They're really feel anxious about returning back to school." So I think it's helping our children make those connections, and we as parents making those connections as well.
Thank you for that. And I think a key thing that you said is this is not just the kids returning to school, but parents need to have presence at the school and make that connection as well. And that's definitely a sacrifice to be made when making a readjustment in the household. With that in mind, when we think about mental health supports at the school, many have been expanding. I'm sure at CREC there has been some expansion in the trauma-informed work. When we think about this expansion of this arm of school, what should parents be seeking out? Is it just the guidance counselor now, or are there some other additional supports that parents should be looking for?
Right, great question. Most districts and most schools now have something that looks like a social worker. When we were coming up, there were no social workers to be found. Now there are at least one in every school. Parents should do their best to connect not only with the classroom teacher and not only with admin, but certainly if your school has a social worker, and particularly if you know your child has particular struggles with certain things. Whether that is maybe wearing a mask, maybe that's navigating the hallways to get to certain places, or being around large groups of people, and you want to be able to transition them back or be able to have a successful school year, you want to connect with your social worker to see if there's any type of support that you can get, whether that's informal support and you just want a trusted adult to check in with them when they get off the bus, or whether that's something more formal and some time limited sessions where you could do some intensive work with them, or if they happen to have a type of diagnosis, a behavioral health diagnosis, and you want to get them on a plan where they're getting constant support on an increment, maybe an hour or a half hour per week, or 15 minutes, every other day, something like that. You want to take advantage of that because it helps their academic success. And it's all about the child being successful academically. However, there are a lot of things behaviorally that gets in the way of that, and we have to make sure that we're doing the best we can as the adults in the child's life to get them the tools they need. If for whatever reason it's you're seeing something at home that may not be happening at school, or either way, connect with the child's pediatrician and get a referral. Maybe see someone who could give them some behavioral health help, some counseling, some therapy. In our high schools, CHR is actually on site in the high school. So now that they're on site in the high school, and if you are able to enroll your child and engage your child in those services, they're not losing any other time from the rest of their lives in order to get help with therapy. So whether it's individual or a group.
Sorry, Sharon, for those that are unfamiliar, if you can explain the acronym CHR.
Oh, I'm sorry. Community Health Resources. They are a behavioral health organization. They do therapy, one of the larger organizations in the state of Connecticut. And they're doing a lot of great work working with schools to get direct care for children in the schools.
Wonderful. Thank you. I know we've given in this conversation a lot of emphasis to the caregivers and the parents, but the load is not just on them. And so when we think about teachers, and we recognize that I taught first, second, and third grade at Montessori, and it would be that if there was a child that was having a particular issue and we tried to work it out in the classroom and that didn't work, that they would be transitioned to go with another paraprofessional and they would work it out in a different space so the rest of the class can progress. But what we're anticipating now and estimating is that when children are entering this classroom, so many of them are battling with various anxieties and other mental health concerns and distresses that we can anticipate a rise in behavioral issues within the classroom. So any recommendations, Carolina and any of the others, on resources or skills that teachers should be looking for in order to provide mental health supports to their students in the classroom?
Sure. I think, Melina, you made a good point, and some of the group that spoke already about just the fact that a lot of our students are coming in with these emotional struggles coming into the school year. And emotional health is a precursor to their ability to learn. And so that is primary. And so when we're thinking about as teachers and school support staff or just school staff in general, some of the things that might be helpful for teachers is, I would say, primary, being able to get their own support. So teachers have been going through so much through the school year, and a lot of them have endorse like have expressed feeling burnt out at times. And so I would say self-care is like number one for a lot of the teachers coming into the school year, and finding out what are some workshops, some trainings that they can access to improve their self-care, right? Or to access more self-care strategies for schools to be able to advocate for that as well, for their teachers, right? How are we supporting our teachers in this process as well? I think Melissa mentioned something really great about how teachers can act, or caregivers, but I think it also applies to teachers, how they can be more trauma informed as well. And so I think resources for workshops and trainings that can speak to how to have a trauma informed classroom is vital. And I think another piece that I would say is also Melissa had mentioned circle of security, and there is an adaptation to circle of security for the classroom. And I would also recommend that for our younger children, and even for our teenagers, to have that insight of not what the behavior is, but what is driving that behavior. For teachers to be able to have that insight and that understanding of my student is not just presenting with an outburst, right? Like that's what's happening. That's what I see. That's what we're experiencing. And it's also very scary for them, right? And so how can I support my student by seeing what is driving that behavior for them? Is it anxiety, right? Is it worry? Is it fear? Where is it coming from, right? And so that's where all of that I think could be really helpful. The Child Mind Institute has a ton of resources as well that teachers can access to support their classroom learning as well in regards to social emotional learning.
Mm-hmm. I think just to add to that, what you just said is so key. And I think about this a lot, and it's relevant to all children. But when I have a child that I'm either working with or that I know who's acting out in some way, and, with teenagers, it's usually something like, defiance or lazy, right? Like that's a big thing with teenagers. It's always being lazy or whatever. I usually try to help parents and teachers think about, let's walk backward from the behavior, right? So let's start with the behavior. What's the external presentation this child is giving us? He's giving us, aggression, or he's being vulgar, or he's being lazy. And then we walk back and we say, what is the thinking behind that behavior? And then we think about, what are the thoughts going through this child's head that result in that behavior? And then we take another step back and say, now what is he feeling that's driving that thinking? So the relationship between the feeling, the thought, and the behavior itself is something that all of us have to be doing for kids all of the time. I wanted to mention one resource for very young children, 0 to 5. It's Early Childhood Consultation Partnership. It's a statewide network of mental health consultants, early childhood mental health consultants, who can come out and provide some observation and classroom support for a child who may be struggling in a preschool program if you have concerns about social, emotional, or behavioral issues in a classroom, particularly as it relates to the pandemic right now. It's a free program statewide. There are no income eligibility. The only eligibility criteria is that the child has to be in a child care setting, and the child has to be 5 and under. So that's a good resource if people don't know about that. It's the Early Childhood Consultation Partnership.
I think that's important, making connections with the school, but also knowing what resources the school has to offer. So for West Hartford district, the Bridge has a school-based counseling program where we can go in and offer counseling as an added support, but also mentoring as well. So I think understanding what resources is in your community is very important.
Mm-hmm.
And I would also plug, I also plug in terms of, this concept of pouring out of an empty cup. I think which Carolina mentioned earlier, a lot of times teachers themselves don't recognize their own triggers, or at least their own stressors. So they're not optimally teaching at the level they should be, especially when addressing a child's behavior or a child's misbehavior. Teachers need to definitely advocate to their admins to give them moments where they can connect with one another, to re-strategize, to reset and regroup and refocus. We actually spoke about that this morning during our PD, and just kind of bounce ideas off one another about things that work. And admins, I think, need to be able to open up and listen, definitely be in tune with their teaching staff about some things that are working and are not working. Because a lot of times there are initiatives that come from wherever, they say, okay, this is what we're going to do. All right. figure it out, right? Without the necessary tools, or not knowing if the individuals, the teachers, the staff have the skills to do whatever the initiative is regarding social emotional learning. So making sure that you are advocating for yourself to not only have that time to kind of de-stress, but also to have the skills to execute whatever social emotional learning initiative is happening in your school district.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not 100% sure, but I do know there is some funding that came through Rescue Act or the before that was meant for schools to address mental health, specifically behavioral health for kids as a response to the pandemic. Now, what happens is that every district gets their own funding and every district decides how it's going to be used. There's no uniformity across the state, but if you live in a district that, may have received these funds, in which some districts got more than others, then you might want to ask about what kinds of extra things are available in the school district as a result of the funding that we got through the federal government to help support our kids, as during the pandemic, and find out what exactly the schools are doing. Because I know that there were a lot of schools that were looking and brainstorming and, coming to agencies like ours and saying, how can we partner with you to make sure that we're doing more here? And there's a lot going on in a lot of different places that is just, kind of pieced together as a response to this.
Melissa, you're going to have parents fired up to show up at that September Board of Ed meeting asking questions, but that's a good thing. And what you all are pointing to more than anything is that this is not going to be school as normal, as usual, but that there are resources, there are opportunities to be explored, and there are possibilities of success, even in the midst of all the challenges that we're facing. We've spoken a lot about the trauma. We've spoken a lot about how children have responded to this and some of what they are emotionally experiencing and how those experiences are translating into behavior. But I want to ask a question broadly to all of you. What do we need to do as a society wanting to support our youth to help them grow beyond the traumas, for us to see past the behaviors and really support the healthy development of their identity? Because when we talk about them going back to school, we're not just talking about the environment from which they get their education, but also a defining space for their identity. So when it comes to identity development, how do we focus in on this as a community?
I think it was mentioned earlier by you, Melinda, about how we were raised. So my first response to that would be to, in a sense, forget how we were raised. Those of us who are 80s babies, I'm not going to give away my age. It's 70s, 80s, even 90s babies. There was a certain way that your household ran and how you were reared as a child and how your community embraced you. And we have to kind of deprogram from some of those ways, because we're starting to learn that a lot of those ways weren't healthy. And frankly, now a lot of those ways won't be as effective with our children, just based on the way society is now. It's just different. So we can't rely on the old ways to teach new kids. So I would say deprogramming from some of the things that we were taught, allowing your child, some more communication, allowing space for choices, allowing just space in general, for exploration and for communication and, for really the definition of love, this love that is, non-conditional. It's not love on my terms. I'm only going to care for you and listen to you and embrace you as long as you do X, Y, and Z. So getting back to really the fundamentals of love and the fundamentals of, of caregiving and doing what you have to do as someone who has made a choice to have this child in your life.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or reflections on how we can support healthy identity development?
Yeah.
I saw Melissa talking. Sorry. I did. Want to go, Melissa?
No, go ahead.
So I agree with Sharon. I think that it's important that we acknowledge that we have to forget some of the things that we are carrying, right? And it's easier said than done, right? So I think I would add that we accept some of that, right? What is it that and we talked a little bit about this, right? Identifying what we're experiencing, and that's a model that's a form of modeling for our children in itself, right? That like Melissa gave some really good examples of how we do that with our young child, maybe that, or teenagers, that I made a mistake and I'm not okay, right? Or like, mommy's having a hard time too, but that I'm here to support you in whichever way possible, right? And I think the bigger kind of piece too is, how do we support them with providing that predictability, but also accepting that some things are going to be different and some things we're not going to know. And so being able to have those conversations with our kids that and some things we don't have control of, but this is what we have control of. And identifying what is it that we do have a sense of agency with, and what is it that that maybe I can support you in gaining a sense of agency with as your parent, and I giving them some ideas as well, because children, teenagers, they may not know. They may say commonly like, I don't know, or okay, kind of go along with it, but give them choices, right? Give them options, so that they can engage in that conversation with you and always come back, right? We talked a little bit about that too. Always come back. So I think I would say, accept, support, accept all the different feelings, all the different emotions and experiences that we're all having, right? And constantly check in. How are we doing as a family with this? How is this helpful to you or not helpful? And how can we change? Because mommy or daddy doesn't always have the answers, but I can look for the answers. And I think that's more important, that being okay with not having all the answers. Because as parents and caregivers and helpers, right, we have this idea that we need to have all the answers, and that's not true, right? And I think being kind to ourselves, that some things we just don't know, and that's okay, but that we're going to figure this out together.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I was thinking before when Sharon, you were speaking, I think you're so on point about how, we kind of need to let go of a lot of the things that we were sort of raised with, because they're not relevant anymore to childhood. I think about that quote that says, children haven't changed, childhood has changed. And as a result of that, we have to change the way we think about children, and how we interact with children. I have to be honest and say, one of the things that I think we need to do as a society to do better by children is to get rid of the phone in our face all the time, especially for little kids. I'm really worried about sort of what we're seeing in terms of relationship and connection and interaction with young children and their parents these days, especially in the past. I don't want to age myself either, but let's say the past 6 or 8 years since, smartphones have been sort of the norm. Everybody has one now, regardless of your, for the most part, regardless of your income level or anything like that, is that most people have access to it all the time. And so for me, that I have a sense of urgency about that, because thank goodness my kids were little before, like, I had a smartphone. I didn't get one until, I don't know, maybe 2011 or 12, and they were already school age by then. Not that I was on my phone all the time, but I probably would have been on my phone a lot if I had young children now. And so I think that, and it's relevant to young kids, but it's relevant to older kids too, that they need eye contact. Young children learn how to interpret the world by looking at your expression when you're interpreting the world. So if they're not getting that with you, that mirror neuron contact is so important. And if they're not getting that with you, that's going to be such a missed opportunity for their development. So for me, that's one piece. And the other piece I'll just go back to are those 3 components of trauma-informed care that are really applicable to all kids. And that's always empower, never disempower kids, provide unconditional positive regard, kindness and compassion in the face of challenges, and allow space for rupture and repair in your family. And so those are sort of the pieces that I think about. As a society, we need to create environments and create experiences for kids where those are the foundations of how they experience other people and how they experience the world in general.
You all in this conversation have certainly encouraged, convicted, enriched, and given insight to me. If no one else, I tell you, I'm walking away from this conversation a whole lot richer and feeling a whole lot more equipped to parent on. And we hope all of our viewers feel the same way. Before we say goodbye to our amazing panel, if you all want to give a quick shout out to anything or any closing remarks, we want to open this opportunity up to you, beginning with Janelle. If you want to give a quick shout out or your closing remarks.
No, I don't know. Well, I just want to just thank you for this opportunity and thank my agency for allowing me to come and be a part of this great conversation.
Thank you, Janelle. Sharon?
Yes, I also want to give a shout out to CREC, the amazing educators in our district, especially those in student support services. And those who are listening, and for parents who might be watching, I'm going to give you a shout out, caregivers. You are doing the best that you can. Don't doubt that. Be proud of your efforts, and we'll work together to get this thing done, which is making sure our children succeed.
Thank you. And thank you for everything you brought to this conversation.
Thank you, Melinda, for this opportunity as well, and this amazing conversation that we were able to have on today. And I also shout out Yale Child Study Center and just every effort that we have been doing in the community to support families as well during this time, as well as teachers and all helping professionals that are in the forefront of all of this with our children.
Thank you, Carolina.
And I'll just say thank you for having me today, Melinda, and hello to all my Wheeler Clinic people out there. And then just as sort of a final thought is that being with children all day as a teacher and having children as a parent is a huge amount of responsibility and huge amount of work. And grown-ups need to ask for help. And so reaching out and asking for help, and even if we are in a situation where we're not out in the world as much and we do have to go back into sort of a closed quarters, experience with the pandemic, find those resources online, find those resources that you can call people, you can set up Zooms with your friends and talk about, the challenges of parenting and brainstorm and just reach out for help in general, I think is really the final thought that I have for grownups who are participating.
Melissa, thank you for the wealth of knowledge and experience that you brought to this conversation. We are truly grateful for our amazing panel, and we encourage you to check out our Community Matters resource page for more information. There's a lot out there between Wheeler Clinic, between the Capital Region Education Council, between the Bridge Family Life Center and Yale University. There's a wealth of information out there, and we have consolidated that information on our webpage, which you'll see Community Matters resource page. So we encourage you to take a look at that information and to access what you need to provide for your families and for your students as they transition back to school. More than ever, it is a time for us to come together and for us to be the community that our children need to see. The YWCA Hartford region continues to stand on our mission to eliminate racism, empower women, and promote peace, justice, and dignity for all. And we encourage you to join us on our mission. So when you visit our webpage, feel free to sign up for our e-blast, our newsletters. Feel free to figure out where you want to play in our space and join our team as a volunteer, or feel free to donate to our cause so that we can continue to make the impact that is needed here in the Hartford region. We thank you for being a part of this Community Matters, and we look forward to having those important conversations again. Have a great day.